All right, we've started recording. Guys, let me introduce to you Dr. Brent Hollers from Sequoia Robotics Team 8080.
Thank you very much. So today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about one of the focuses that we've started to try to look at with our team, and that is community service and how we've kind of tried to get these projects rolling. It's something that I have in previous years struggled with in terms of getting our students engaged and on board and really taking these projects seriously. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I think has helped in that process and what we're trying to do to make it a little more effective. So we're going to talk about why you should even consider community service, how to pick a service project, how to establish goals and benchmarks, and then some examples from our team that we're currently working on and that you're welcome to join us in. So first things, why community service? So there's a number of different valuable reasons why we want to engage in community service as a team. One of the first things is that it's listed in a couple different places as part of the first core values and the mission statement and gracious professionalism. I'm going to kind of delineate each of those. It allows us to expand our knowledge. So building robots is great and amazing, but not all of us are going to be building robots when we get out of high school and advance forward. And so what are some other areas that we can kind of delve into that are STEM related, but that might even be more focused to a particular student's interest or group of students' interests. So we get a lot more diverse experiences through engaging in community service than just the challenge itself. We can create some lasting relationships. So one of the I'm going to talk a little bit about, lives down the road from me in my very own neighborhood, and being able to reach out to someone that's right here in the community and help them is something that's beneficial not only to the students but to that person, and you develop that relationship that sometimes you may not get otherwise in terms of just establishing those connections that end up being lifelong connections, hopefully. And so some very good relationships that come out of that that are positive on both sides. It allows you to embed yourself in the community, and that's both locally and globally. FIRST has a global reach, and that's definitely of interest, but we also want to make sure that the community is aware of what we're doing, especially in STEM. So it's allowing us to reach out and help people understand that we're not just a competition robotics team, we're a lot more than that. And so having examples of where we're doing that rather than just focusing on a competition is definitely very beneficial. This is something that people don't tend to think of, and it might almost seem like a little bit like you're going to talk about funding with community service. Yes, there's nothing wrong with getting funding for community service, and it can also benefit your team. We're going to talk about how to do that graciously and in the right way. And then attracting new team members. This is something that we've used these projects to try to get people on board. And it's one of those things, a lot of the sessions have been talking about, well, how you deal with COVID and how you deal with, having virtual meetings and all these other things. This is a great opportunity where you can get kids involved that are virtual learners, that are in-person learners, that maybe don't want to come to a team meeting. If you have a physical team, you can still assign tasks and projects for them to complete. And they're not as high stakes or high risk as, you're going to build the sub-assembly at home. They may not have the abilities or tools to do that, but there's a lot of opportunities out there for them otherwise that they can actually be involved in and feel like they're contributing. And additionally, it allows you some added areas for leadership and ownership. So a lot of times, one of the struggles that you have, especially if you're a larger team, is looking at how do I get every student engaged? How do I make sure that everybody, they have a purpose towards the team and that they're actually contributing to the team? And community service is a great way of doing that because they're creating tangible things that do benefit the team. So we're going to talk about each of those. First of all, I just wanted to throw up here the first mission. And I want to point out something that kind of strikes me when I read the mission. You'll notice in there that nothing really explicitly says that we're building competitive robots, right? There's nothing in there that specifically says our goal is to build robots for competition. Now, do we do that? Absolutely. But I thought that Dean made a really good point that that's the hook. That's the hook to get kids and get people involved in the program. The broader mission is what you see here. It's to inspire young people to create leaders and innovators. And that can be done not just by creating a robot, but it can also be done through community service. And so I think that it's very important that we take a step back and say, yeah, we're doing this. It's just like anything else. When you talk to a coach of a sport, one of the things that they'll talk about is that, if they're playing football, it's not just about football, it's about developing character in those young men and women. And so that's something that you see in sports, but it's also true in FIRST. We're developing a lot of really neat skills that are STEM based, but that are also just developing leadership skills as well. And this is a great way to do that. So in the core values, you'll see again gracious professionalism. It is something that we talk about and we hammer home all the time at competitions and how we treat other teams and that type of thing. But also, if you read it again, it talks about emphasizing the value of others, respect for individual community. And there's no better way to emphasize the value of others and talk about helping out the community than through community service. And so, again, it's just another way, another outlet to demonstrate gracious professionalism outside of treating each other respectfully in the pits and doing the things that we know we should be doing in competitions. And then again, this is the core values that are on the first page, and it talks about all these things. And again, not a lot about robots, it's more about skills, ideas, persistence. These are all things that can be developed through a successful community service program. So developing relationships and skill development. One of the things that is really, really neat about community service projects, and the two I'm going to kind of speak to today are Go Baby Go and Enable, or Enabling the Future, is that you get to work with a diverse group. And when I say diverse, you're going to be able to work with different minority groups, but also you have the opportunity to work with people who otherwise you may have never seen, contacted, or understand the struggles that they may be going through. And it allows you to address those things in a interesting, unique way. So one of the clients that we're working with in the Go Baby Go project, she has a very rare form of a genetic modification where she's missing a specific protein. And there's only something like 4 cases in the entire world that this has ever happened. Anomaly, it's not a passed on genetic attribution or anything like that, but it's created some significant challenges for her. And so the students in this program are able to interact with her and her family and see the challenges that they have with her and be able to touch her life in a very unique way. And so you're getting that exposure to people that you may not necessarily get exposure to otherwise, you may never interact with. Like I said, they live in my neighborhood and I never met them before until we started doing this project. And so it's a great opportunity to meet people that you may have never met before and to create some connections along the lines of empathy and some of the soft skills that you need to develop when working with people. Engineers solve problems. That's something that the engineering profession is focused on. And so solving problems deals with people. And that's one of the first things that you start looking at when you're talking about engineering design is the idea that we have to identify stakeholders. We know how those stakeholders are being impacted by a problem. And so being able to do that with a group and interacting with those people in a different channel is definitely a unique opportunity. Development of empathy and compassion is important, right? We are definitely in a competitive environment, and that's great. Competition builds a lot of amazing skills as well, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily always provide us the opportunity for empathy and compassion, which is something that when we work with these groups and we meet these people who, in the case of Enabling the Future, we are working with people across the world that can't afford prosthetics. Right. And so we're 3D printing and creating these prosthetics for them. And you get to see some of the things. Some of them are birth defects, but some of them are people who have lost limbs. And you get to hear some of their story and learn about them and learn about different cultures. And so that's something that's definitely beneficial in developing the empathy and compassion. Another thing that's really become very evident and that's been very helpful in this is time management and project management. Project management and time management are critical things during the build season, and community service projects can be geared in such a way that we make sure that we're documenting things properly, that we're creating timelines and meeting those timelines, that we're managing the various steps of a community service project, just like we would a build. And so it's a great practice in some ways for creating those skills that will then be used in a competitive season and beyond competition, right? Time management and project management are critical in basically any STEM degree or field that you're going to go into. So, and then you're developing technical skills. So in the case of Go Baby Go and in Enabling the Future, we're working with design, 3D printing, we're working with construction and electronics. There's a variety of different things that we're learning on, but again, it allows us to include a variety of different team members. It's not as high risk or high stakes as a competition season when we have a limited build time and things have to be done to a certain specification in a very short amount of time. So it allows that skills development and something that's practical, that's beneficial, and that they see value in. And we're doing a lot of this, as I mentioned, in the off season. So right now, this is our key focus, is we're working on these community service projects. So community interaction and involvement. So one of the things that we're really focusing on is, as we do these projects, we're trying to get the word out to local groups. And there's a couple different ways that we're doing this. So I actually work and teach in Cherokee County. And so they have a communicator that's sent out to all the parents and all the schools. And so we have written up a little essay that kind of talks about the program and how it started, includes some pictures, those types of things. And we sent it to them, and it's going to be featured in the next month's bulletin. There's local newspapers, there's local radio and TV as well that you can reach out to get the word out. And when you do that and people see, hey, this team from such and such place is really doing some cool stuff, that builds some community capital within your organization. So that's something that you want to have. So it's important to get the word out. Social media, websites, great too. A lot of people may not necessarily go to that, and a lot of people that may eventually be people that are going to help you fund these projects or mentor these projects may not necessarily be in those channels. So try to use a variety of channels to reach out to these various organizations and people. So it allows us to create that local presence and local support. We use our local Rotary quite a bit for this purpose as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works later on. And one of the things that's important to understand too is that you can get local organizations to support a global purpose. So in the case of Enabling the Future, we have clients that are in Germany, Australia, India, Pakistan, and we're developing and printing these prosthetics for them. And yet the 3D printer that we got donated for this purpose was donated by a local organization here in Canton, Georgia. So you can definitely help local people while still being able to have a global reach with these. And I think that that's a good vision for when you're selecting a project. Can you be able to scale it in that type of sense? So make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're reaching out to news and media outlets whenever possible, because this is something that you're doing that's benefiting other people, and you want to let people know that. So there's a few different things that you can do there in terms of community interaction and involvement. Now, one of the things that when we first started doing these service projects, especially the Go Baby Go, I was hesitant to say, well, can we go to a company or an organization and say, yeah, we need money for this? And by the way, maybe we need a printer, and that printer might be used for other purposes within the team, but we're also going to use it for this. Or, you know, we need $800 to build this particular chair, even though we know it may only cost us $400 or $500. And I was initially a little bit hesitant to do that because my thought was, well, this is a service project, right? And we should basically be managing the costs, and whatever comes in is what also goes out. And that is true in some sense, but this is also a way of kind of doing a fundraiser for your team while doing community service. And so one of the things that we talked about to our local Rotary and some of the other organizations that we work with is that, you know, the donations of either materials or resources or funds are going to directly benefit the team, but they're also going towards these community service projects. And if we want those service projects to continue, then we have to have a team, right? And so that's part of one of the important things to understand, is that there's nothing wrong with saying, yeah, this is going to cost us, you know, a prosthetic arm may cost us $5 in filament to make, but we may want people to sponsor those and say they want to print 5 prosthetic arms. You know, we may ask them for $100 instead of $25. Why? Because if we need to be able to continue our program's longevity, then we need to be able to have funds to keep the program up and running. And so there is a cost associated with keeping a team and managing a team, and that's, you have to build that into the cost of your running your service programs. And so it's not a bad thing to ask for more than what you're going to need for a project, because again, you want your team to be able to be sustainable in the long run. Should it be your only primary source of fundraising? Of course not. You're not going to be able to do that. but it is an additional source that allows you to invest in the team a little bit more instead of just becoming a pass-through. Service also draws a larger donor group. And this is something I experienced when we were trying to get funding for a team that I ran previously to the one I'm at. And we're a local competition team. We're doing some things here and there. And that's neat, but it's not terribly inspiring to people that are looking to put their money behind projects that are going to have a large community impact. In reality, if I'm not going out and doing community service, then I may be able to say, yeah, we're doing a competition team, we're benefiting these students, but at the end of the day, they're going to be looking at what's going to benefit the community as a whole. How does this tie back to STEM learning and all these other things that we see in the mission? And so having some inspirational story or service project that goes along with what you're doing as a team might just be the thing that pushes a company or a donor to donate more than what they're paying or donate at all, because they see some of the great work you're doing as a byproduct of your program. And so it's something that can get people engaged on a personal level. People may not understand competition robotics like they do basketball or football or something like that, but they can understand serving someone that is missing an arm, or someone that can't get around, so they need a mobility scooter or something to that effect. That's very relatable to them. And so service actually makes it more relatable as a program, and may end up leading to more funding from those organizations, or funding in general from them. So this is something that should be at the forefront of what you're presenting to donors and trying to get them involved in, because again, it's a byproduct of your program. It's something good that's coming out of it, and we want to make sure we demonstrate that. So the other thing that I found that's been kind of unique and interesting is another positive byproduct of the programs is that it attracts new members. So when we started getting the programs off the ground, one of the things that our school started doing was saying, we're going to do service letters. And you have to get 60 hours of community service in order to get a service letter. And my students had been asking, well, can we get a letter in robotics? And so we kind of married those two programs together and said, okay, well, if we get 60 hours of service, then they can letter, and they allowed me to get a special robotics pin if they did that. And so we've been able to create those two programs, but at the same time, it's also allowed us to say to students, hey, you don't have to be like the rest of the nerds. You can just come and build 3D printed arms, or you can come work on this. And it's a little bit lower commitment threshold than it is to say, hey, come join the robotics team. And by the way, we have $500 in team dues or whatever it happens to be, right? It's a great hook that is of interest to them. It's neat, it's different, but still understandable. And so it gets them in and gets them helping out with those groups, and they're getting service hours if you have a community service program. So it's allowing them to be a part of that, and eventually the goal being that they get drawn into the program and want to continue building and expanding upon their knowledge as part of a member of the team. But we still allow them to come and participate in these service programs, even if they decide not to be a part of the team. And that's another part of the community outreach that you can talk about, is that we want to have a STEM leadership, right? And so leadership and outreach in the community is your local school community as well as the community as a whole. And so if you're getting students involved in STEM activities, even if they're not part of your team, that's fantastic. You're getting them interested in things that they may not have otherwise experienced. And that is, at the end of the day, the mission of FIRST, right? And so that's something that can hook them in with a very low barrier to entry, which is often sometimes a little more compelling than let's go build a robot and compete, because that can tend to scare people away sometimes. So a lot of different options for you in getting new members. Leadership and ownership. This is a great opportunity, because especially if you're a large team, you have a limited number of leadership opportunities within an organization, right? You might have your team captain, you have your drive team leader, and you have your electrical or build or whatever, or your programming team lead. So you have a limited number of spots. And so what we've done is we have project leads for our 2 service projects, and those project leads are not team leaders. And we do that intentionally because we want to see people that maybe have an interest in these things, take some ownership and see how we can develop them as a leader before putting them into that leadership structure. And so we're giving them that opportunity, and we're kind of vetting them at the same time. So what you do is you find someone that's passionate about it or even interested in it, and give them ownership. And then you do that, that makes them become more passionate about the project. So we make them project leaders, and we're building them up to future leadership positions if that's what they are interested in. If not, then that's fine too. But it gives you a channel to feed into your future leadership programs. Doesn't also mean that you can't have juniors or seniors running this, but it allows you to find other alternatives. So maybe you do have a junior or senior that is not involved in your leadership structure, but you want to give them some accountability and ownership and keep them engaged and involved and giving back to the team. Then maybe this is a great project for them to take on, that they can really find some really beneficial aspects from. So it also allows us to have accountability. So we don't want to have these service projects without having a project lead, because then it just becomes something that, oh, are we working on it? Well, yeah, we're kind of here, but it's stalled, and we don't really know who's responsible for it. So it's really, really important to set up that leadership structure so that you have accountability with it. And that just makes sure that we get things done, make sure that we get tasks completed in a timely manner, because at the end of the day, we are dealing with, I refer to them as clients. Even though they are recipients, it's a gift, and they're not paying for anything, I like to treat them as clients because they have expectations, and we don't want to string them along. We don't want them to not meet the expectations that they have as a program. So we want to make sure that we treat them like clients and get things done in a timely manner. So again, it reinforces all those soft skills of project management and those types of things, and working with a diverse group of students. So in our team, everybody is assigned to one of these two service projects. And while the project leads may not be a leadership team member, they can be working with a leadership team member, but everybody else is assigned, so they're contributing to these projects and they're getting to experience them. So it's definitely important to have that leadership structure, and you have a couple different avenues to go through with that. So how do you go about picking a project? We've done a few different projects in the teams I have coached. One of them we did was we built a tiny home and donated it to a homeless veteran. It was an amazing project. It's something that was really cool, and the students learned a lot of skills. It was a very difficult task to pull off, just because of costs and donations and everything that goes along with it. So it's something that was very interesting. The scope of it was very, very large, very broad. So it required a lot, and it ended up involving a great deal of the school community, which again was a great thing, but it was a huge project to manage. And so from that perspective, when I asked the students at the end, did they want to do it again, a lot of them were kind of iffy because it just required so much. And so keep in mind that when you're looking at who all is interested in it, the scope of the project, what's it going to require in terms of personnel, in terms of time, in terms of resources. We want to consider all that when we're looking at a project, and is it something that we can handle and take on for our team? If you're a huge team, if you have 50, 60 students on your team, then you might be able to take on a project like that, because chances are that you have the number of students and the resources to attack it. But if you're a 15, 20 person team, building a tiny home is something that's going to be way beyond the scope of your abilities, and you're just going to end up getting frustrated. And so one of the things that I initially did was I sat down with our team and I said, okay, what are you guys interested in? Like, what are the skills that you would like to learn that are related to STEM, and what are some projects that we can try to find? And I was aware of these two beforehand, but I wanted them to kind of go through and try to find some things. And we spent a week or two looking at different projects and activities. And when we came down to it, these were the two that they really found the most interesting and that they felt like they could accomplish. And so those were the ones we focused on. The scope of them is relatively narrow because we have a small team. We're only 2 years old, this being our second year. And so from the scope perspective, we can print a few 3D printed prosthetic arms and send them out, and that's not a hugely complex task to do. And so it's something that we know is achievable, know is accomplishable. And the same thing with Go Baby Go. We can build one mobility cart and send it out and know that we're going to be okay. And that's something accomplishable. And when you start talking about goal setting, that's something else to keep in mind, is with a service project, what are our goals, and let's make sure that those are reasonable. One of the things I've heard consistently with some project managers and people in various STEM subjects is under promise and over deliver, right? So if we can build one cart and that's our goal, but we end up doing two, that's fantastic. But if we say we want to do 5 and we only do 3, then it feels like we didn't meet our goals. So especially for students to feel success, it's important to know that we want to set goals that are reasonable, that we know are achievable, and then always push for more. If we can push for more, we can get more, great, then we have a sense of accomplishment above and beyond the things we're already doing. So who all is interested in what things, and you may find students that are very passionate about specific things like 3D printing or like laser cutting or CNC machining or whatever happens to be. Find out what those interests are and then try to pair projects with those interests. Keep in mind how big you want this to be or how small you need it to be, what resources are going to be required. So if you're going to do a 3D printing project or service project, you need to have access to a 3D printer or have a plan to acquire one, or printing services or something to that effect. And then what skills are associated, because again, in the mission, it's talking about developing STEM leaders. And so we want to be able to tie back to, is this an actual STEM project? We can go and beautify the campus by picking up trash around the campus, and that is a service project technically. There's not a lot of STEM related to that. And so we want to ensure that whatever project we're doing ties into STEM skills in some form or fashion. So the projects that we're looking at, or that we've been working on, Enabling the Future is the first one, and I'm going to show you the website here in a second. But basically what it is we custom design and 3D print prosthetic hands and arms for people that cannot afford them. And so the way that works is there is a website called Enabling the Future, and let me see if I can go ahead and pop out here for a second and share that website. Share Chrome.
All right, while he's doing that, I just want to remind all of our audience, if you are going ahead and you already have any questions for Dr. Hollers, just make sure to put it in the Q&A so that we can see it and then get those questions in. All right, back to you.
All right. So this is enablingthefuture.org. This is the website of the organization that we're working with. And what they basically do is they have chapters of these organizations, and they provide for you 3D printed models. And you can see this child here has one of the 3D printed prosthetic hands that is available. And there's a variety of different models and a variety of different things that you can do. So let me pull up the actual Web Central here. So the process for how this works is you create a chapter, and the chapter process requires you to get approved on at least one device, and then you register with the organization, and they put you on their chapter map. There's actually a number of chapters here in Georgia and all across the United States. And once you get registered for a chapter, you are allowed to then start printing and providing prosthetics to people that are on the program here. And so I'm just going to pull in so we can see some of the people that we are currently working with. So here's, let's see. So here, for example, is a case that we're working on. And when you go in there, you're able to see information. And by the way, this is just to give you an idea of what a case looks like. This person has agreed to share the pictures and information with this, but this is one of the clients that we're working with. But they'll give you sizing measurements. They tell you what kind of the specifics are of their case. And then there's a variety of different ways that you can volunteer. And by the way, they also tell you what devices they're interested in. This is called the unlimited arm. There's also an unlimited hand. That's one of the more popular ones. The flexi arm, if you're familiar with 3D printing, is TPU. So the fingers are TPU, and the rest of it is typically PETG. So if you're going to do a 3D printing of this stuff, they typically expect you to do PETG just because it's non-toxic. PLA has a tendency to not do well in humid environments, and so they tend to tell you not to use PLA just because it will break down over time, especially if it's near somebody's skin. Just the humidity from their body, or humidity in general, breaks it down. So we try to do PETG. ABS is toxic, so you can't use it. And so you can see that there's different things that you can volunteer to do. So you can be an experienced volunteer, which is just someone that kind of navigates the process and makes sure that things are getting accomplished, that you get all the correct sizing. But then there's also fabricators and there's assemblers. So what we do is we go in and we find cases, and then we reach out to that person, and we typically volunteer for all three of those roles. And then we tell them, hey, if they're missing, which they almost always are missing particular sizing elements, then we go in and get sizing from them. Once they give us the sizing, color preferences, those types of things, we then go and 3D print the prosthetic and we mail it to them. And then they'll give us feedback. They'll send us a video or picture if they can of how things are working. And if there's any parts that break or need tweaking or whatever happens to be, we can just continue that chain of communication to get those parts fixed or adjusted and sent to them. And so you have a whole messaging tab which talks about that, and I'm not going to go into that, but just so you can see there are the ability to message these people. And this person, I believe, is in India, if I remember correctly. And so you can make recommendations for what devices. They actually have a whole reference for the various devices that are available. All the different designs, you can see there's a number of them. They even have this thing called the Nick finger. We're doing this for a particular individual, and it's a single finger. So if it's someone that got a finger chopped off by something like that, then you use TPU and PTG, and they have a little wrist thing around here. When they flex their wrist, it pulls this little string, and that flexes the finger. And that's the general principle behind how the hands work as well. So the hands will have 5 of these across the top of it, what's called the palm, and the gauntlet. So the gauntlet is what will go up here, up the arm, and then the palm sits right here where their hand typically would be. So it is their palm, essentially. The strings will go up into the gauntlet, and when they flex their wrist, then it will close all the fingers around. That's what you saw that child doing in the picture. There are arm designs as well, and basically the elbow movement is what creates the movement in the fingers. So these are all non-electrical. They're all mechanical. There are electrical options, but they try to avoid them just because a lot of the places that you're printing, one of the places that we were looking at trying to work with was in Egypt. And it's just like they did not have the ability to have access to batteries and those types of things that you're going to need in order to make this, effective for electronics. So most of these are mechanical designs, and there's a variety of different designs that you can see. So let me just show you the Phoenix hand. So this is one of the more popular designs. You can see here's the pins across the top, and they run down through the palm and down through the joints here. So the default nature is that these things are open, and so when they flex their wrist, they close. So you'll see these little things here. These are actual orthodontic bands. They use orthodontic bands to kind of merge these two joints, and so when you flex, it closes, but when you release, the orthodontic bands contract and pull the fingers back out. They have these little grip things that go on the end to give them a little bit better grip. And each of these has a different, I like that they actually have a matrix here. It tells you like how difficult is it. If it's green, it's fairly easy. Grip strength, all that kind of stuff. And these are things that you communicate with the client. So, some of them may think, yeah, this is way too bulky. And especially if it's someone that's very sensitive about their physical disability, then they may not want something that bulky. So then you can go with things like, let's see if they have the flexi hand, right? So this is much more streamlined, much cooler, right? It looks kind of like an actual hand. This is much more difficult to print, and it requires a different type of filament, TPU. So you'll see that the grip strength is also not nearly as good as that other hand. So there's a lot of things to consider, and this kind of helps you make recommendations. So it's a really neat program that you can do, and you can print 1 hand a year. You can print 20 hands a year. They have what are called handathons, which is basically where you get together and just assemble hands and print hands, and they do drives and those kind of things. We have the ability now as a chapter. Our school is actually going to be housing all the spare hands for the entire United States in our school. And so if you ever need to borrow one for demonstration purposes, that kind of stuff, then we have the ability to provide that for you. So there's a lot of different options. Maybe you can't 3D print a ton of these because you only have access to one 3D printer or something like that. You can put on workshops on how to build them and then request other people print them. So there's a lot of people that'll just print these things and send the parts out. So the cool thing about this is that not only are you getting the files to do this, but you also get the core CAD files as well. So you can go in and modify this. So one of my students had a client where his thumb was still existing, but the rest of his fingers were missing. So he basically took the file and cut off this section where the thumb was and allowed his thumb to go through, and then the rest of the fingers existed as they normally would. So the files are there for you to just print, and all you have to do is a little math to scale them based on the person's wrist diameter. But then you can also modify them, and you can remix them and make them better. So there's a lot of that goes on well. So even if you can't 3D print, maybe you can take a design, make it better, and then submit it back to the community for approval. That's another way that you could be involved in this and not necessarily have to create a chapter or have access to a 3D printer. So that is them. While I've got this up, I'll go ahead and talk about the Interact First Alliance. So this is the other project that we do. If you're not familiar with Interact, there's a group called the Rotary, and these Rotary organizations exist throughout the country. And there's business service organizations. So they're made up of business leaders in the community, and what they do is they go out and try to do community service wherever possible. And so they have local clubs and schools called Interact chapters, and they will fund those Interact chapters to help do community service. So the business people will donate to particular organizations and groups to allow them to do things that kind of align with the service mentality of the organization. And they budget this every year. And so one of the things that we actually became a part of, and you'll see this is actually Firestorm is the one that put this together. Alexander Kua is the person that's in our Canton Rotary, and he's the one that kind of helped us get this established. We're just a member of this Interact First Alliance. But basically, he's started creating a group of teams that are doing this Go Baby Go project that you see kind of scrolling in the background here as part of a larger service organization, but at the same time, it helps fund the team because they'll donate to your team as well as to helping you build these mobility cards. So that's the Interact First Alliance. Again, if you want to learn more about that, you need to talk to Mr. Kua. He's the one, again, Firestorm. Their team members down here, I believe, is 6341. They're out of Etowah. But they're the team that kind of established this organization, but we are also a part of it. It's been very beneficial to us. It's how we got our 3D printer donated to do our Enabling the Future hands, and it's how we're getting clients and getting resources for doing our Go Baby Go projects. So that's the Interact First Alliance, and it's interactfirst.org is their website. So the last one I wanted to talk about was Go Baby Go. So this was actually a project put together by a University of Delaware professor, and he had his students working on it to basically figure out a way of increasing interaction with small children. And so you can see here an example of some of the earlier versions. They were basically taking Power Wheels and making and modifying them so that they could either be remote controlled or driven by small children that had physical disabilities, because one of the things that he found in his research was that smaller children, especially ones with physical disabilities, don't have the ability to interact with their peers, and so they're more likely to develop societal problems and societal adjustment issues later on as they progress into early adulthood. And so his goal was to create some way for people to actually create a device that these children could be involved in and then follow around and interact with other children. If you've ever been around small children, they're always on the go and they're always moving. And so that was what this organization was set up to do. There are no chapters for this particular group, and it's very kind of nebulous in the sense that it's an idea more than it is an organization. And so what we do is we actually take what are called Power Wheels Wild Things. And I'm just going to show you a picture of that. But the Power Wheels Wild Thing is just this little kind of cart thing. And we take this and we modify it so that a child that has physical disabilities or limitations can drive it themselves, or they can be remote controlled. So what we do is we pull the guts out of it, put a Arduino in it, and use two XBs to communicate with a wireless joystick made by SparkFun. And then we also use a single joystick instead of a dual joystick that has a much finer control, so that children, especially if they have strength issues where they don't have quite the fine motor skills that are needed to use both of these joysticks, then it's a little bit easier for them to control it. So these are pretty easy to find. I know the price tag may scare you away, but You can find these on Facebook Marketplace for like 60, $70 all day long. They're all over the place. And so anytime we see them, we snatch them up. We take the seed out, we pull the electronics out, and then we put an Arduino with the code in it. And we're in the process of documenting all of this so that other teams can use it as kind of an open source platform for building. So that's the Go Baby Go project. Let me hop back now to the presentation. Okay, so with enabling the future, what we're doing is we're creating a promotional video that we're then going to post on social media and our website. We're also, like I mentioned, it's really, really important with any of these to reach out to local community newspapers, media outlets, any of those kind of things. They love to report on this kind of stuff. And if you have someone that's managing the project or have people that are on the project that can write up something for them, then they'll cover it. They love doing that stuff, especially if you make it easy for them. That's something I've found is always the way to go. So don't write up a media organization and say, well, we're doing this really cool thing, and we'd like to tell you more about it, and can you come and write a story about it? They're not going to do that. But if you give them a nice big write-up that says, this is what we're doing, this is how it ties into our organization, give them all the specifics, give them some pictures, the likelihood that that's going to get published becomes much, much higher. And it also may even get them to come out and do more in-depth research on it because you've already done a lot of the legwork for them. So you want to ask yourself when you're reporting these things, what are the basic questions someone might want to know about why you're doing it, how you're doing it, those types of things. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're doing that. And then what we're going to do is based on that, you can use a number of different options. There's things like GoFundMe, which will charge, so we're trying to avoid that. But there's other ways of raising funds through either Facebook or other organizations. And what we're going to start doing is taking donations from people that want to sponsor the program. And again, just like you might do donors for various levels within your robotics program, we're going to do the same thing there so people can donate 10, 25, 50, $100. If they want to sponsor a whole wheelchair in the case of Go Baby Go, then it might be a little bit more, but we're going to allow them different sponsorship levels and to donate remotely, and all those funds are going towards printing and then the remainder towards our team. So that's kind of how we're going to work through that. And then, of course, like I said, we're documenting that process as well. But the nice thing about enabling the future is there's already a lot of existing documentation. So that's a pretty cool project. And Go Baby Go, again, same kind of thing. We get most of our resources through just going on Facebook. And you'd be surprised, too, if you're on Facebook Marketplace and you see one of the wild things and you explain to people who you are and what you are, especially if you have like a formal letter or something like that, a lot of them will knock money off the price or just give it to you, especially if they think it's going to a good cause, and especially if it's tax deductible. So if you can provide a receipt, a lot of times you can just get those things donated. And in the same process, Go Baby Go, we're going to be pushing that out to social media, the website, and various other avenues to try to acquire funding. And again, we do levels. And the nice thing, too, is that where your robotics levels, like team sponsorships, may be a higher threshold, like your minimum might be $500 or $1,000. For these, you can say, hey, can you donate $20? Can you donate $30? Something to that effect. And you're going to get a lot broader appeal and impact and probably more donations. Our student that kind of started the Enabling the Future project at our team has already raised like $1,500 in the past 4 months just on printing prosthetic hands, because he is able to demonstrate the concept, show an impact, and then use almost entirely Facebook to get that money. So there's definitely ways of going and increasing your funding through those. And again, it's a lot easier for people to donate $20 or $50 instead of $500. So it's a way that you can get a different revenue stream coming in to attack those projects and to help support your team. And then documentation, again, is critical on these things. One of the things that we're working on currently, and hopefully we'll have done by the end of the season, is an open source platform. So instead of having to buy wild things, we're working on building a setup where you can use sim motors and a basic Arduino to control the motor controllers and run it that way, so that it also trains you in systems that you need to be familiar with anyways for first. So that's something we're working on. If you want a system, that we're more than happy to get you involved in that. So the first Interact Alliance, like I mentioned, was the Rotary Interact. That was the area that kind of combines, and it's really a cool project, and it's a great source of funding. So I would strongly recommend that you look at establishing an Interact charter at your school, and then pairing with the local Rotary, because they have a pretty substantial amount of funds to help your team out. And a lot of times they'll budget $4,000 just to go your team, and you can do it that, as long as you're showing and demonstrating that you're producing service project related things out of it, then some of that funds can go towards your team and help with the other expenses that you may have. So I told you who to contact on that. So at this point, does anybody have any? Do you have any questions in the Q&A or any questions that you may have? And I also just want to mention, if you want to partner with us in any of these projects, just email me. We'd be happy to partner with you, whether it's getting a chapter established and getting it off the ground, or if you just want to provide support or resources to any of these projects, feel free to. If you want help getting started, we're happy to train you either virtually or in person. You're welcome to sit in on our meetings and those types of things and see how we're running stuff.
Oh, definitely. This has been an awesome presentation. We have right about 15 minutes up, but realistically, because we're the last session of the day, I think we also have a little bit more flexibility. So if anyone has any question, you can go ahead and put them into our Q&A section here in WebEx, and we'll go ahead and ask away. So just drop them in the chat, or drop them in the Q&A. There you go. No, this was definitely an interesting presentation to watch, just because I had seen some of these projects through some news articles when it came to Interact Force, but I never actually, and I knew that some teams actually here in Georgia did it, but I didn't know the extent of the process. So this was definitely eye-opening.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's really cool. Like, basically, at the beginning of this year, we were told we're not allowed to use the printers, the 3D printers that the school has. We have a Stratasys and a MakerBot, and they were just kind of like, well, you're not allowed to use those for these projects. And so we were kind of like, we've already started these things, and how in the world do we, 3D print prosthetics without a 3D printer? And so I just emailed our contact at the Canton Rotary and said, hey, this is kind of the pickle we're in. Can you help us out? And literally within a week, we have a 3D printer at our school, brand new Dremel 3D 40 Flex. And then we also had funds donated to buy a Flash Forge Creator Max. And so we have 2 3D printers now, one a dual extruder that allows us to put stuff together. So it's been pretty cool how quick they've been to respond.
All right. So then, let me ask this. I'm thinking a little bit more about this. So, have you seen that the students that get into it have a little bit more of the emotional attachment in terms of what they do in engineering, and a lot more of their focus in terms of where they go after they do these projects? Sometimes it's more focused on the people affected when we engineer solutions, like whether it be or when we have science or technology with these solutions, whether it be something like biomedical engineering being a doctor, even just in the fields of more like hospitality type engineering, or engineering that makes a difference to someone.
Yeah, it definitely kind of shifts their focus to understanding that there's people outside of themselves. That's something that's hard in engineering classes or in robotics, because it's like, we're building to a challenge, and it's like, and that's great. I'm not downplaying that at all, but it lets them make that people connection, right? And that's something that they're going to be doing in engineering, as like for the rest of their lives. And so, for example, the kid that's doing the Enabling Future project, he started out this last year. We were like, we want to do this. We know we want to do this. And I just asked, is there anybody that really wants to take this on? And he's like, yeah, I'm an Eagle Scout, or I want to be an Eagle Scout. So I'll do this as my Eagle Scout project if you're willing to kind of be my mentor through the process to get it started. And he has become so engaged, and he's met some really cool people. So he met a doctor in Maryland that she's running a whole organization up there, And we actually sat down and video chat with her and talked about all the different ways this is having impact in the medical community. And he would never gotten the opportunity to sit down and meet that person and talk to them and learn the things they did without having gone through this program and done what he's done. And he was engaged in part of the process last year, the team, but he's become much more engaged in the team as a whole and much more of a leader in the team because it's something that he's so passionate about now. And the same thing with the Go Baby Go. We were meeting with the client that I mentioned the other day virtually, and one of my students started crying after the end of the presentation because we were talking to them and they got off and I was asking their feelings, and she was just in tears because she's like, I never knew that people had to deal with this kind of stuff. And it just, you could tell just from the way they were talking that it immediately became more personal and more important to them. And that's what you want to see, is that connection to the real world, because when it becomes something that they own, they'll go through, they'll run through brick walls to get it done, and that's what you want, is for them to have that passion about something, because if they can develop that in high school, they can do great things beyond.
No, I agree, and that is really awesome. Now, there we go. We have questions. I will go ahead and ask you one question. So we had someone that came in, and they said that last year their team worked with Magic Wheelchair to build a custom Halloween costume for a local child. It helped our team bond in the fall, and it helped the students in our school to see more real world applications for robotics and STEAM. It was a great partnership with some art students. That actually brings up a really big question. So when you're doing interact first and you're figuring out these partners, um, what would you say is the aftermath of it? Like, I love what Miss Marine said in terms of the fact of even working with art students. I love when people change STEM to STEAM, because then you're bringing in the creativity part. And so, for you, have you seen people, even possibly students, that um, may not have been interested in the engineering part, but they wanted to be a part of the larger um, interact first, and even with your team because of what you're able to do with interact first.
Yeah, so one of my students that I teach, so I teach the computer science pathway, which has both web design and computer science. And I've actually had some of my web design students who are learning things like Photoshop and Illustrator. They would design decals and things like that for the wheelchair to make it cool for a small child, And so it's something that they're not really in that pathway necessarily, and it's not something that they're going to sit down and want to try to program it or anything like that, but there's that connection there that they're starting to get. And I've had kids that, too, there's, from a teacher's perspective, it's a little unique because you see kids that would typically not be involved in an after school activity, right? They just go home and get in trouble, or something to that effect, right? And they may even be in trouble in the classroom from time to time, right? And it becomes, I've had kids that have seen this, but they're so passionate. They're good kids. They're just don't have a place to direct their energies that's positive, and they've latched onto that, and they're like, yeah, I'd like to be involved in that. I think that'd be cool. And they end up becoming involved in it. They're not even a part of the robotics team, but they are being connected to something larger than themselves. And I think it has that draw. And so what I've seen is that we have kids that would have never dreamed of doing anything related to STEM or technology that are getting involved in unique ways and coming up with unique ideas on how to put their own spin on things, right? Because to that poster's point, the art, the it's hard sometimes to implement the arts and a STEAM mentality into STEM projects, but a lot of times if you just approach them and say, hey, this is what we're doing, what would you like to add to this? Things like the decals and those kind of things just kind of pop into their head. Like, yeah, I don't know how to program it. Man, I'd love to paint that thing. Make it look cool for them. It's a young girl and the thing's green and black. We want to change it up a little bit, make it a little bit neater for them. So those are all different things I've seen them, become involved and engaged in just because they're looking at it from a different perspective, and that's something that you want too.
Okay. This has been good. All right. If anyone else has any more questions, definitely drop them in our Q&A. We have right about 5 minutes, but Dr. Hollers, I wanted to say this has been an awesome presentation. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it. I definitely want to kind of relay this now to my students on with circular robotics and see if there's any way that we can either help do one, or even just help one of the teams that are currently in Georgia doing these types of projects for possible materials, resources, whatever it is. So thank you for this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem. And I'll show something real quick while we're waiting for any more questions to pop in. So see if this will pull up. Sorry, I've got a bunch of tabs open. I've been looking at all my events today, so let me see if I can find. Oh, let's see. So these are all the chapters that Enabling the Future has throughout the United or throughout the world, right? And there's a bunch of them. So you can see just in the state of Georgia, there's one down here, close to the Savannah area, Barrington, and then there's us. Walker School's got one, Lanier's got one, Blackwell Elementary School has one. So there's definitely some chapters out there that are being involved. One of the things that we initially kind of ran into that was just a little bit of a challenge sometimes was finding clients. And so we've actually found people locally in the community as well. We have someone that's meeting with us on Wednesday that's one of my students' moms was going through Publix, and she saw this guy without a prosthetic, and he had, basically lost from the forearm down. And she was like, we're doing this project where we're 3D printing prosthetics. Would you be interested in one? He's like, sure. I've never thought of that. I couldn't afford one on my own. And so now we're meeting with them. We're gonna print them an arm. And so there's a lot of cool opportunities out there, but there's they're all over the country. So there's a lot of really cool stuff.
That is awesome. And so let me ask this question before we go. I really like these projects because of the impact that it can have. But it's really interesting that you said that specific story about how it was someone that you guys saw as you were walking through Publix. So my question is, do you see that through these types of presentations that actually let me put the question like this: do you see that there is a large community here in Georgia that needs this, and and now your folks, you will see that, or now you're seeing that there's more opportunities even outside of like the system that you guys have with enabling feature and everything else. Now you're even just normally just seeing in the community and able to kind of to jump on it. How do you see that being a part of it? Because I that actually kind of hit me the most, because now it's something that it's not just I think a lot of people, when they think about these projects, they always think, they think maybe like everywhere, but a lot of times when it comes to when you see it in your own community and you're doing something about it, it hits me differently a lot of times. So, are you seeing now the chance to do more projects even here in Georgia with prosthetics and things like that? And even now, I would almost say working with maybe places like Northside and places like that to even get better at making prosthetics that are I don't know how to describe it. Maybe changing the game of how prosthetics are done.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely going to create some channels for us in that sense. There's already some programs that have started creating those types of partnerships, because what may happen is, let's say Northside, for example, a person may come in and not be able to afford a prosthetic. They do the surgery, they move on, right? And there's no outlet for them, because that's one of the bigger issues with this project is just awareness, right? People don't know, but they don't know. And so that's definitely something that I think that, again, going back to how could a team that doesn't maybe have access to 3D printers or doesn't have necessarily the bandwidth to do something like that, how could they contribute and make that their own? I think establishing those relationships, building a network where people are aware, where hospitals are aware. It doesn't take anything to go to Northside Hospital, borrow a hand from us, and say, this is what we can do. You know, can we get clients from you? Can you recommend, or can we bring in and do some examples and those types of things? I think that that's something that definitely is within the realm of possibility and definitely would probably be a great way of expanding it.
All right. Well, I am not seeing any more in our Q and A. So, if anything, if we want to go ahead and end it here, we can. Again, thank you, Dr. Hollers, for doing this presentation. It was really great. And to our audience, I want to say thank you for being a part of not just this this session, but just our symposium. And remember, we will have these recordings up later during the week. Check your email from Peach Press and from anything from Georgia Firms relaying where the recordings are going to be. I would recommend even taking a look at honestly what we're going to be doing next, because COVID is happening right now, but it means that Georgia First is getting smarter in what we're trying to do for our community. So, again, thank you everyone here. Thank you, Dr. Hollers, for this presentation. Want to say have a great rest of the weekend, and we'll see you at our next event for Georgia First. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.